The day Walter Hayes was humiliated for being dirty in front of his entire family was the day they finally saw what that dirt had been hiding for years. They thought the stains on his hands proved he didn't respect himself or their home. They didn't know those same hands had quietly carried every one of them, paying bills they never saw and making choices they never knew about, until there was almost nothing left of him except those stains. They thought they knew his story. They had never asked where the dirt came from. It was a bright Saturday afternoon in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of cold, sunny fall day that made the sky look too blue and the shadows too sharp. Walter shuffled up the cracked sidewalk toward his daughter's tidy suburban house, each step heavy from a 12-hour shift. His boots were crusted with dried mud. His jacket smelled of concrete dust and motor oil, and sweat still clung to his flannel shirt. At the mailbox, he caught his reflection in the metal door, seeing deeper lines than 78 should hold, gray stubble along his jaw, and eyes dulled by a tiredness sleep never fixed. He scrubbed his hands against his jeans, trying to erase the grime ground into his skin as if he could rub himself into someone cleaner, more acceptable, more worthy of their photos. Inside, the house hummed with a completely different kind of energy. Emma, his 24-year-old granddaughter, stood in front of the hallway mirror in a white dress, adjusting a loose curl near her cheek until it fell in a perfectly casual wave, while her fiancé, Tyler, leaned nearby in a crisp shirt, scrolling through his phone as group chats lit up with "We're almost there" texts. In the kitchen, Walter's daughter, Melissa, fussed over a store-bought cake, adding extra frosting swirls, while her husband, Craig, adjusted string lights on the back porch for the perfect backdrop. The house smelled like pulled pork from the slow cooker, vanilla frosting, and fruit punch chilling in a glass bowl. Mason jars of flowers lined the table beside neat trays of snacks, everything placed like props in a catalog. To anyone else, it would look like a picture-perfect American family moment. Walter knew how often real hurt was pushed just outside the frame. He climbed the last step to the porch, his knees aching, and stared at the front door. For a moment his hand hovered above the handle, suspended between wanting to belong and wanting to disappear. He knew Emma wanted everything aesthetic and Instagram-ready, and he knew nothing about him fit those words. Still, he wrapped his fingers around the handle, drew in a breath that tasted like nerves and exhaust, and knocked twice. The door swung open almost immediately. Emma's face appeared, glowing with engagement day excitement. Her smile shone when she first saw him, then flickered. So quickly most people would have missed it, as her gaze dropped to his boots, his jacket, the smudges on his cheeks. Something like embarrassment flashed in her eyes before she smoothed it away. "Grandpa, you made it," she said, stepping forward for a hug while angling her body, so her white dress didn't brush against his clothes. He hugged her carefully, keeping his arms a little away as if he could shield her even from his own dirt. "Wouldn't miss it, kiddo," he murmured. Her perfume, sweet and expensive, mixed with the faint scent of dust rising from his shirt. The moment lasted only seconds before she pulled away, already glancing toward the driveway where another car was pulling up. "We're just finishing up before everyone gets here," she added. "Mom's freaking out. Tyler's parents are almost here. Come in." Her voice was warm, but her eyes flicked once more to his boots. Walter stepped into the living room and instantly felt how out of place he looked. The hardwood floors gleamed like they'd been polished that morning. A pale rug lay under the coffee table, the kind that didn't forgive heavy boots. Gold balloons spelling "She Said Yes" floated above the room, reflecting light from carefully placed lamps. He wiped his palms on his jeans, hyper-aware of every speck of concrete dust and grease clinging to him like a crime. Melissa appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel dotted with frosting. Her eyes swept him from boots to collar in one quick scan that told him everything. There was the smallest tightening around her mouth when she saw the mud. "Dad, you came straight from work?" she asked, voice a little too bright. He shifted his weight, unsure where to stand. "Didn't want to be late," he said softly. She forced a small laugh. "You know you could have changed first, or at least washed up more. Tyler's parents are very traditional." Walter opened his mouth to tell her about the overtime, the rusty sink, the envelope in his wallet, but the words tangled with pride and shame. "Did what I could," he muttered. "Sink there's not much." "Aye." Craig stepped into the hallway, adjusting his cuff, looking perfectly pressed and camera-ready. "Walt?" he said with practiced cheer, giving him a light clap on the shoulder. "Good to see you, man. Big day." His eyes flicked down to Walter's boots, then back up. "Hey, why don't you hit the guest bathroom? Wash up a bit? Emma's gonna want everything perfect in the pictures." Perfect. The word landed heavy, as if Walter's presence itself was a flaw in the shot they were composing. Guests began to arrive in waves, neighbors with casseroles, Emma's friends with manicured nails and loud compliments, Tyler's parents with a beautifully wrapped gift and polite, measuring smiles. They handed Walter their coats and hellos as if he were part of the furniture. No one asked how he was. No one wondered why a man his age still wore work boots on a Saturday. If this moment hits you, tell me, have you ever watched someone slowly turn invisible in a room they once held together? In the kitchen, Melissa leaned toward Craig, lowering her voice just enough to believe no one else could hear. "I swear he does this on purpose," she muttered. "Tyler's parents are going to think we dragged him here from a construction pit. Couldn't he have tried a little? Just this once?" She didn't see Walter standing just beyond the corner, half in shadow. The words hit him square in the chest, blunt and heavy. He stared at his reflection in the dark glass of the microwave, wondering when the man his family counted on became the man they apologized for. His fingers brushed the envelope in his pocket, the paper gone soft from being opened and refolded, the diagnosis, the medications, the numbers that never quite balanced. It was the reason he still took any shift he could get, the reason his hands shook more now and never came entirely clean. He had kept it from them so they wouldn't worry, so they wouldn't feel trapped by his needs. He had chosen to be tired instead of being a burden, and standing in his daughter's hallway, he wasn't sure which hurt more. The noise in the living room swelled. Laughter, clinking glasses, the shutter of a phone camera snapping little frozen moments near the gold balloons. Walter slipped quietly out the side door to the back porch, letting the cold air bite his cheeks and steady his breathing. String lights hung over the yard. A cream-colored tablecloth fluttered on the food table, and a wooden sign read, "Welcome to Forever." As he leaned on the railing, something small and dark near the fence caught a shard of sunlight. At first he thought it was trash, but the neat rectangle made him frown. Curious, he stepped off the porch, boots crunching on the stone border, and crouched to pick it up. It was a phone, the screen still glowing warm in his palm as if it had just been held. In the center of the screen, a red dot blinked above a paused image. A video recording. Walter tapped once, and the clip sprang to life. On the screen he saw himself, standing alone on the very porch he'd just left, rubbing his hands on his jeans, shifting awkwardly as guests moved past inside. The camera was zoomed in tight on him, close enough to catch every wrinkle and smudge. Whoever had been holding the phone hadn't just noticed him, they'd been watching him. He listened as faint laughter bled in from the house, and over it a soft whisper came from behind the camera, familiar, close, and sharp enough to split him open. In that moment, Walter realized the worst part wasn't that someone had filmed his humiliation for later. It was whose voice had chosen to record instead of reach out. And as the words on the video sank into him, he knew this day was about to rip open far more than just his pride. Walter stood frozen on the porch, the phone heavy in his hand, the familiar voice echoing through the tiny speaker. It wasn't just the content of the whisper that wounded him. It was the tone, the intention, the quiet sharpness behind the words. He replayed the moment again, unable to look away from the version of himself on the screen, shoulders hunched, hands nervously rubbing against his jeans, a man shrinking in real time. The recording wasn't accidental. Whoever filmed him didn't step in to help. They stepped back, to capture, and that truth lodged itself deep in his chest, like splintered wood. For a moment Walter felt himself slipping out of the present, pulled backward by the kind of memory that doesn't ask permission to haunt a man. He saw himself 40 years younger, standing in front of a rusted truck in rural Ohio, Margaret leaning on the passenger door with a gentle smile, her dark hair curled from humidity. Back then, Whenever he felt small, she'd press her palm to his chest and whisper, "Right here, Walt. Your worth starts right here." He had believed her. He had lived by those words. But standing on this porch decades later, watching his granddaughter mock him behind a camera, he felt that belief crumble. He shut his eyes, inhaling deeply as if the cold air could steady him, but instead another memory rose. Emma, at 6, tugging at his beard with sticky fingers, giggling as she smeared frosting on his shirt. She had always loved climbing into his lap, even when he came home dusty from work. "Grandpa, you smell like outside," she'd laugh, burying her face in his neck. Now she flinched at the idea of her dress brushing against him. Time didn't just pass. It sharpened the edges of people, carving out new versions of them he no longer recognized. Inside the house, the party noise grew louder. Music, laughter, glasses clinking like tiny bells. It all blended into a blur, muffled by the storm building inside him. He couldn't bring himself to step back in yet. Not until he understood why this recording existed. Why someone he loved felt the need to capture his humiliation instead of protecting him from it. If you had found that video of yourself, would you want to stay or run? He lifted the phone again and paused the video, staring at the frozen frame of himself with downcast eyes. He wanted to be angry at the person behind the camera, but mostly he felt a familiar ache, an ache that came from years of people seeing his flaws, but never his efforts. He remembered the mornings he woke up at 4:30 a.m., while Melissa was still sleeping in her childhood room, packing a thermos and 2 sandwiches before heading to the steel plant. He remembered walking into school events in shirts that smelled faintly of metal, Melissa brushing past him because her friends were watching. She had been embarrassed then. Maybe that had never changed. He moved toward the railing and leaned on it, feeling the wood creak under his weight. The yard below was covered in brown leaves that hadn't been raked yet, the last remnants of autumn clinging to the earth. He stared at them as another memory tugged at him. A night with Margaret in the kitchen, their hands intertwined over a stack of medical bills, her voice soft but steady. "We'll get through it," she'd said. "You always find a way." He had, and he had continued finding ways long after she was gone. But now, for the first time, he wondered if anyone had ever noticed the cost. When he opened his eyes again, he wasn't alone. A group of guests had spilled onto the porch behind him, laughing loudly as they carried drinks outside. One of them bumped his elbow lightly as she passed, muttering, "Oops," without looking at him. Another eyed his boots and whispered something to a friend. Walter lowered his gaze, embarrassed, wishing he'd had even 5 minutes to change before the shift had demanded everything from him. He wasn't supposed to be the center of attention today, yet somehow he had become the piece of the picture everyone tried to crop out. He slipped back into memory again when the breeze shifted, bringing the faint scent of diesel from a truck on the street. He was transported to the job site where he'd worked earlier, the heavy machinery humming, the rough banter of young workers, the ache in his back as he lifted 80-pound bags of cement because no one else wanted to. He remembered the foreman telling him, "You're tough as nails, Walt. Tougher than all these kids." And yet the same toughness now made him look worn out to the people who owed him everything. How ironic that strangers respected what his own family dismissed. Another memory struck him, sharper, heavier. It was the night Margaret died. He remembered kneeling beside her on the kitchen floor, dialing 911 with shaking hands, whispering, "Stay with me, Maggie, please." The doctors had told him afterward that her heart had simply given out. But in the quiet of the house that night, he'd looked at their daughter, Melissa, and whispered, "It's my fault." He'd believed it for years. He still did sometimes. And since then, he had felt responsible for holding everything together, even when he too was breaking. A gust of wind rustled the leaves and brought him back to the present just as the porch door slid open again. He turned his head slightly, expecting another passing guest. Instead, it was Emma. Her expression softened when she saw him alone, though something guarded flickered behind her eyes. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she asked, stepping closer, her dress glowing under the string lights. She didn't know he'd heard her earlier, She didn't know he'd seen the video. Walter managed a small, fragile smile. "Just getting some air," he said. She nodded, but her eyes darted toward the yard, toward the fence line where she'd likely been earlier filming him. "It's just, people are asking where you are," she said. "We're doing photos soon." Photos, perfect snapshots, carefully chosen angles, and no dirt allowed. Walter nodded again, trying not to let the hurt spill out. "I'll be there in a minute," he whispered. Emma hesitated, then offered a half-smile before disappearing back inside. The moment she left, his shoulders sagged. He wasn't ready to face the crowd. Not now. Not with the truth of that recording pressing against his ribs like a stone. He played the video again, once, twice, listening to the whisper behind the camera, the quiet judgment in each syllable. The world around him blurred, until all he could see was the image on the screen and the shattering weight of his granddaughter's words. He wondered if Margaret would have recognized the way their family treated him now. He wondered if he had failed them somehow, or if they had simply outgrown the man who once carried them. Walter gripped the railing harder, knuckles whitening. He didn't know how much of this he could take. He didn't know whether to confront Emma or keep the pain buried like he always had. But the longer he stared at the phone in his hand, the more a single truth crystallized in him. Someone in that house, someone he loved, had chosen to document his shame instead of asking if he was okay. And that betrayal cut deeper than anything Melissa or Craig had said. Just as he lowered the phone, the screen lit up with a new notification. A message from someone whose name he had not seen in years. His breath stopped. His heartbeat skidded. He felt the air thicken around him. He stared at the illuminated name, disbelieving it. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." The name flashing on the screen was one he thought he might never see again. One tied to guilt, grief, and a chapter of his past he had locked tightly away. The wind howled across the yard, as if the world itself braced for what was coming. And when he opened the message, the first sentence changed everything he thought he knew about this day. If someone from your past reached out at the exact moment your heart was breaking, would you answer? The message on the phone glowed like a warning flare in the dusk light, its sender a ghost from a chapter of Walter's life he thought he had buried for good. For a long moment he simply stared at the name, unable to breathe, unable to blink. His thumb trembled above the screen as if touching it might unleash something irreversible. The noises of the engagement party behind him faded, replaced by the roar of blood rushing in his ears. Whatever this message held, it wasn't meant for a moment of celebration. It was meant for a reckoning. The name belonged to someone who had once been the center of Walter's world, someone he'd lost in the kind of tragedy that rearranges a person's soul. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to open the message. Only one sentence appeared, short but suffocating. "Walter, you need to call me. It's about Daniel." His legs weakened instantly. The porch seemed to tilt beneath his boots. The name, his son's name, hit him like a sudden drop in temperature. He hadn't heard anything about Daniel in years, not since the last conversation that ended in shouting and slammed doors. He had spent countless nights wondering where Daniel was, whether he was alive, eating, working, breathing. The silence had worn him down, carving worry into the deepest lines on his face. For the message to appear today, of all days, on the same day someone filmed his humiliation, made the air feel charged with something more than coincidence. He whispered to the wind, "Why now, God? Why today?" The phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds in his palm. Walter stepped off the porch and moved toward the darker corner of the yard, needing distance, privacy, space to gather himself. The string lights cast warm halos across the grass, but beyond the fence line, only shadows waited. He dialed the number with hands that shook more from emotion than age. Each ring felt like a heartbeat, measuring out the longest 10 seconds of his life. Then a voice answered, older, rougher, but painfully familiar. "Walter!" The sound hit him like a punch to the chest. He had not realized how much he missed hearing his son's voice until it scraped through the phone like broken glass. "Danny?" he whispered. There was silence on the other end, heavy, loaded, spanning 7 years of guilt and unspoken apologies. When Daniel finally spoke, the tremor in his words betrayed a fear Walter hadn't heard since the boy was a teenager. "Dad, I don't have time to explain everything, but you need to listen to me. You're not safe in that house." Walter felt the air thicken, as if even the breeze were holding its breath. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. Daniel inhaled sharply, as though bracing himself. "Craig is planning something bad, and he's dragging everyone else into it." The porch lights hummed above him, the soft buzz almost mocking in its normalcy. Walter gripped the phone harder, panic rising in his throat. "What do you mean, I'm not safe?" Daniel's voice cracked. "He's trying to get power of attorney over you, medical and financial. He's telling people you're declining mentally, that you're not stable, that you're confused." Walter felt the ground slip beneath him, the humiliation from earlier, the recording, the whispers. It had all been building toward something much darker. "Danny, they wouldn't," he began, but Daniel cut him off. "They would," his son said, voice raw. "I saw the paperwork myself. It's why I'm calling. Craig is in over his head with money, debt, business problems. He thinks you're the solution." Walter staggered toward the railing, gripping it until the wood pressed sharply into his palm. His daughter, sweet Melissa, would never agree to this. Unless she didn't know. Unless Craig had convinced her something was seriously wrong with him. Walter thought of the envelope in his pocket, the diagnosis he hadn't told them, the truth he'd locked away. Hiding pain to protect the people you love can sometimes destroy you instead. "Does Melissa know?" he whispered. Daniel's voice softened, but the weight of sadness hung in every word. "I don't think so. She trusts him too much. She always has." Walter closed his eyes, heart pounding. He remembered Melissa as a teenager, defending Craig even when the man didn't deserve it. He remembered the way she clung to stability after Margaret died, needing structure, needing a partner who appeared steady even when he wasn't. Walter had always worried Craig hid cracks behind his perfect smile. Now those cracks were wide enough to swallow him whole. Walter felt a dizzy rush of helplessness, the kind that strikes a man who has been strong his entire life, but suddenly finds the world too heavy to hold. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. Daniel hesitated, and the silence that followed was colder than the October wind. "Because I saw something today," Daniel finally whispered, "and I can't keep quiet anymore. Dad, I saw how they looked at you. I heard what they said, and I followed Craig to the car when he made that call." Walter's stomach clenched. "What call?" Daniel sighed. "The one where he said, 'Tonight's the night.'" A chill crawled down Walter's spine, filling the spaces between ribs like ice. He gripped the railing harder, his heart racing. He remembered the video on the phone, zoomed tightly on his humiliation. He remembered the whispers from the guests, the way Melissa flinched at his clothes, the way Emma avoided hugging him fully. Everything felt like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was part of. "Danny, come here, please. I need you here," he said, voice trembling. Daniel exhaled. "I'm close, not far, but I need to know one thing before I come." His voice dropped lower. "Are you alone out there?" Walter turned toward the porch lights, scanning the yard. Shadows shifted near the fence, barely perceptible in the dim glow. His breath caught. Someone else was outside, watching. He lowered his voice. "No," he whispered. "I'm not alone." Daniel's tone sharpened instantly. "Dad, listen to me. Don't go back inside. Don't confront anyone yet. Just stay where you are. I'm coming." Walter nodded instinctively, fear settling deep in his gut. "Hurry, son," he whispered. "Please." Before Daniel could answer, the porch door slid open behind Walter, flooding the yard with warm yellow light. Footsteps creaked across the wood. Walter spun around, tucking the phone behind his back. Melissa stood there, eyes wide, face tight with worry. But something in her expression was off, too controlled, too practiced. "Dad, what are you doing out here?" she asked. Her voice wavered, just barely. "Everyone's looking for you." "Mom." Walter searched her face, trying to read her, trying to see if she knew the truth. "Just needed air," he said slowly. Melissa stepped closer, glancing at the phone hidden behind his hip. Who were you talking to? Walter's mind raced. If he told her it was Daniel, she might call Craig. If Craig knew Daniel was back, everything could escalate. No one, he lied gently. Melissa forced a smile, though her eyes didn't soften. Well, come inside. We're doing toast soon. Emma wants everyone together. Walter hesitated. His pulse thudded in his ears. Melissa noticed the hesitation. Her smile faltered. Dad, is something wrong? Walter's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her everything, but he couldn't. Not yet. He glanced toward the shadow near the fence. It had moved closer. His skin prickled. Melissa followed his gaze, confused. Dad? What are you looking at? She asked. Walter swallowed. Nothing, he whispered. But the fear coiling in his chest told him it wasn't nothing. Someone was out there. Someone listening. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. Melissa placed a hand on his arm, soft and trembling. Come inside, she urged. Please. You're worrying me. Walter took a step toward her, torn between fear and the desire to keep his daughter safe from the truth. His fingers brushed the phone in his pocket. He needed to stall until Daniel arrived. Give me 1 minute, sweetheart, he murmured. I'll be right in. Just then the phone buzzed violently in his pocket. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Daniel again, urgent, desperate. Walter's heart hammered. He knew he couldn't answer with Melissa standing there. She frowned. Dad, is that your phone? Are you sure you're okay? Walter forced a nod. I'm fine. It was the biggest lie he'd told her in years. Melissa lingered another second before turning back toward the door. Hurry, she said softly. You're missing your family. When she went inside, Walter exhaled shakily and pulled the phone out with trembling hands. 3 messages, from Daniel, all in rapid succession. The first, Dad, get away from the house, now. The second, I saw who's watching you. The third, it's not who you think. Walter's breath stuttered. His hands shook violently. He lifted his eyes toward the dark corner of the yard, and the shadow stepped forward. If you saw a familiar silhouette appear where no one should be standing, would you run toward it or away? The figure that stepped out from the darkness moved with a careful, deliberate pace, as if testing the ground with each step. Walter's breath caught as the shadow crossed into a weak beam of porch light, revealing the edge of a familiar jawline, the curve of shoulders he had memorized in another lifetime. For a moment he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, an old man's imagination stitching ghosts into the dark. But when the figure came fully into view, Walter felt the air leave his lungs in a broken rush. It was him. It was Daniel. For a heartbeat the world went silent. The laughter from inside the house faded. The clinking glasses muted. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Daniel stood there at the edge of the yard, thinner than Walter remembered, his face marked by sharper angles and a haunted kind of exhaustion. His hands were tucked into the pockets of a faded jacket, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the yard as if searching for threats. When his gaze met Walter's, something ancient and aching passed between them. 7 years of silence collapsing into one impossible moment. Walter's fingers tightened around the phone he still clutched, knuckles white. He took a step forward, unsure whether to run to his son or keep his distance. Daniel raised a hand, a small gesture, trembling slightly. Dad, he said quietly, the word rusty from disuse. Walter's throat closed. He had pictured this moment hundreds of times, heard it in dreams, whispered it to the night after Margaret died, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of seeing his son standing there, older and broken in ways time alone couldn't explain. "Danny," Walter whispered, the name leaving his mouth like a prayer. You came." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes flicking again toward the house as though expecting someone to burst out. "I had to," he murmured. "I didn't want anyone else to find you first." The word struck Walter with confusion. "What do you mean?" But Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice urgently. "Dad, there are things you don't know. Things about Craig. Things about this family." His gaze hardened. "And things about me." Walter's heart pounded. He wanted to reach out, to pull his son into his arms, to erase the years of hurt hovering between them. But Daniel's posture was guarded, stiff, ready to bolt. "Danny, talk to me," Walter pleaded. "You disappeared. I thought I lost you for good." For a moment Daniel's expression cracked. Pain flickered in his eyes. "I almost lost myself," he admitted. "But I'm here now. I'm trying." Walter took another step, expecting Daniel to retreat, but his son stood his ground, trembling, but rooted. "What happened to you?" Walter asked softly. Daniel's gaze drifted toward the ground, shame washing over him like a shadow. "More than you think. Less than I deserved," he whispered. "When Mom died, everything just broke. I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't breathe, couldn't look at you without seeing the moment she fell." Walter's chest tightened. He remembered every night of that year, searching for signs Daniel was slipping, praying he could hold both his children together. But grief had been heavier than his hands. Daniel looked toward the porch where warm light spilled onto the yard. "Dad, I didn't just leave because I was angry. I left because I was drowning, and I didn't want you watching me disappear." Walter blinked, tears burning his eyes. "Son, I would have walked through hell to save you." Daniel shook his head. "I know. That's why I had to go." The ache in Walter's chest grew sharper. "Have you ever lost someone who was still alive?" he wondered. "Someone you would give everything to help, but who ran because they believed they didn't deserve saving?" Walter reached a tentative hand forward. "Come inside. Just for a minute, Emma will want—" Daniel flinched, shaking his head violently. "No," he said. "Not yet. Not until I know you're safe." Walter frowned. "Safe from what, Danny?" Daniel looked up at him with hollow eyes. "From the people who said they loved you, but are planning something you don't see coming." Walter felt a cold ripple move through him. "Tell me," he whispered. "Tell me everything." Daniel inhaled shakily as though preparing to confess something that had been eating him alive. "Dad, the reason I found out about Craig isn't luck. It's because I've been watching him." Walter's brows furrowed. "Watching him?" Daniel nodded. "For months." His voice dropped lower. "You think you know the man, but he's not who he pretends to be. And he's not acting alone." Walter's breath stilled. The shadows around them seemed to thicken. Just then, a burst of laughter exploded from inside the house, jarring the tension. Daniel's eyes darted toward the porch door, muscles tightening. "Dad, listen carefully," he whispered. "I'm going to tell you something that won't make sense right away, but you need to trust me." Walter nodded, his heart thudding. "I trust you," he said. It was true. No matter how many years had passed, or how many mistakes had been made, he trusted his son more than he trusted most people in that house. Daniel stepped closer until they were only a few feet apart. "Craig met with someone last week," he whispered. "Someone who's been trying to dig into your finances, into your medical records, your work history, everything." Walter felt his stomach twist. "Why?" "Because he wants control," Daniel said. "He wants the house, your savings, your pension, and he's telling people you can't make decisions anymore." Walter's knees felt weak, but Daniel reached out and grabbed his arm, steadying him. "But that's not the worst part," he said. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of barbecue from the kitchen. Daniel looked toward the side of the house, scanning the shadows. "Someone else is involved," he said quietly. "Someone inside that house. Someone you trust." Walter's pulse hammered in his ears. He thought of Melissa's forced smile, Emma's flicker of embarrassment, Tyler's condescending tone. Anyone could be hiding something. Anyone could be smiling at him right now while stabbing him in the back. "Who?" Walter whispered. "Tell me who." But Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope, thin, worn, folded down the middle. "This," Daniel said, placing it in Walter's hand, "is what I found in Craig's truck. He didn't mean to leave it there. He thought no one would ever look." Walter stared at the envelope as if it might burn him. His fingers trembled as he carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no more than a few lines long. But the moment Walter's eyes landed on the first sentence, his legs nearly buckled, his mouth fell open, his breath stuttered, his vision blurred. "Dear Mr. Read, as requested, We have initiated the evaluation of Walter Hayes's mental competency. He read the sentence again and again. It felt impossible, unreal, betrayal in ink. Craig hadn't just planned to control Walter's money. He had begun the process of stripping him of his independence entirely. Daniel's voice broke through his shock. "That's why I came," he whispered. "Because they're going to hit you with this tonight. After the toasts, after the photos. They think you're too tired to fight back." Walter felt the ground tilt again. His throat tightened until breathing hurt. He looked up at Daniel, eyes full of confusion, pain, disbelief. Why would someone do this to me?" Daniel's expression softened with grief. "Because they don't see you anymore," he said. "They see what they want from you." Walter swallowed hard, a tear sliding down his cheek. He had suspected he was a burden. He had never imagined they would weaponize that belief. Before Walter could respond, the porch door flew open. A flood of warm light spilled over the yard, illuminating both men. Melissa stepped out holding 2 glasses of champagne, her smile bright, too bright, frozen when she saw Daniel standing there. The glasses trembled in her hands. "Daniel," she breathed. "Oh my God, Daniel." Her voice cracked between relief and shock. Walter turned toward her, still holding the envelope in his hand, the truth burning hot and heavy between them. Daniel stiffened instantly. Walter felt the change in the air, a shift from hidden danger to exposed truth. Melissa set the glasses on the railing, eyes darting between her father and her brother. "Why didn't you tell me you were here?" she demanded, her voice rising. Daniel's jaw locked. "Because I don't know what side you're on," he said. Melissa recoiled as if slapped. "My side? What are you talking about? I'm your sister." Walter lifted the envelope with a trembling hand. "Mel, what is this?" Melissa's face drained of color. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "Dad, it's not what it looks like," she said, stepping toward him. But Daniel stepped in front of Walter protectively. "Then tell him," he snapped. "Tell him why you signed your part." Melissa's lips parted in horror. "Danny, how did you—" But Daniel wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring past her, because someone else had just stepped out from the doorway. Someone holding a folder. Someone who wasn't supposed to know any of this. Emma. Her hands shook as she clutched the folder to her chest, and her voice, small, broken, cut through the night like glass. "Grandpa, you need to see what Uncle Daniel didn't tell you yet." Emma's knuckles were white around the folder, her fingers digging so hard into the cardboard that it bent under her grip. The perfect makeup, the curated dress, the practiced smile, none of it survived whatever she had just seen. To Walter, she suddenly looked less like a bride-to-be and more like the little girl who used to hide her face in his shirt when thunder shook the windows. He said quietly, stepping closer. "What are you doing out here, sweetheart?" His voice shook in a way it never had when he was younger and stronger. Emma glanced at Daniel, at Melissa, then back at her grandfather. "I found this in Mom's closet," she whispered, hugging the folder to her chest. "Behind the suitcases. Hidden. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did." Melissa's face drained of color. "Emma, that's private," she snapped, fear cracking through the words. "You had no right to go through my things." Emma turned on her with a kind of hurt Walter had never seen in her. "No right to what?" she shot back. "To know you and Craig were planning Grandpa's life without him? To know there were people ready to take everything from him like he's some stranger on paper?" Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, a muscle ticking in his cheek. Walter felt the tension thrumming between all of them, a wire pulled tight. He murmured, soft and tired. "Come here, honey. Let me see." She hesitated, then stepped forward and placed the folder in his hands. Her fingers were cold against his calloused skin. He opened it slowly, the weight in his stomach growing with every breath. On top were copies of his medical records from the neurologist, notes about tremors, balance checks, memory tests, the word progressive, circled in pen. There were printouts of appointments he'd gone to alone, lab results, lists of medications with side effects he never talked about, Beneath those lay bank statements with big withdrawals highlighted and a typed summary from a social worker he had never met. "I never spoke to any social worker," Walter whispered. "That's because she spoke to Craig," Emma said, her voice shaking. "And to Mom." Melissa's shoulders slumped. "I was scared," she said, tears already forming. "Dad, your hands shake. You forget where you put your keys. You push yourself at work like you're still 40. I didn't know what to do. Craig said he'd talk to professionals, see what our options were before something bad happened." Walter looked up at her, hurt, carving new lines into his face. "So you let him talk about me like I was already gone?" he asked softly. "You never tell us anything," Melissa cried. "You hid how bad Mom was right until the end. You hid working extra shifts. You hid Daniel's rehab. You hide your own diagnosis. I thought, if Craig handled the paperwork, at least someone would have control before everything fell apart again." Walter glanced back down and noticed something that made his stomach twist. On the forms about power of attorney and finances, Craig's name was everywhere. Melissa's was almost nowhere. "If this was about helping me," he said, his voice low, "why is his name on every line that touches my money?" Silence fell fast and heavy. Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it, realization creeping in. Daniel spoke instead. "Because Craig's been drowning in debt for years," he said flatly. "I saw it when I was in treatment, trying to get my own mess sorted. Credit cards maxed out, business loans overdue, stupid investments." Then he looked around and saw an old man still working himself to the bone and a house almost paid off. Emma wiped at her cheeks, then pointed to another set of pages. "And he used all of you to get it," she whispered. Walter flipped the stack and froze at the heading. A statement from the rehab clinic. "Remaining balance due, $42,000, transferred to collections, legal action possible." His own name stared back at him in bold. "That can't be right," he murmured. "I went to the bank. I took it out in cash." "You did," Daniel said, eyes darkening. "You took it out, but it never reached the clinic." Walter felt his pulse thudding in his ears. "How do you know?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Because when I finally sobered up enough to face the debt, they told me. They'd never seen the money. They showed me the ledger. Zero." He paused. "And then I remembered Craig waiting for you in the bank parking lot. Him saying, 'Let me take it by for you, Walt. It's on my way.'" Emma's voice cracked. "He stole it, Grandpa," she said. "He took the money you worked for, the money you bled for, and he never paid the clinic. Then he told Mom they kicked Uncle Daniel out because you refused to cover the rest." She looked at Melissa, eyes flooded with betrayal. "Did you ever stop to ask Dad? Or did you just believe the story that hurt the least to question?" Melissa staggered back, as if the truth itself had weight. "He said the clinic called him," she whispered. "He said they told him Dad wasted the first payment and wouldn't commit to the rest. I was furious at you, Dad. I thought you chose your pride over your own son. I had no idea I didn't know you'd emptied everything." Walter's chest burned. "I would never abandon him like that," he managed. "Not after what happened with your mother. Not after watching you both fall apart." Daniel stepped closer, the shame in his expression laced with something like fierce protectiveness. "You didn't abandon me," he said. "I abandoned myself, and then I let people use your guilt like a tool." He nodded toward the forms. "Craig knew you'd blame yourself for everything. He knew you'd rather break your back than let anyone feel you were a burden. It made you the perfect target. If you were in Walter's place, would you ever be able to forgive that?" From inside the house came a distant clinking of glass and a muffled, "To Emma and Tyler," followed by cheers. Emma looked toward the windows, glowing warm and golden, then back at him. "They're in there toasting the future," she said, "and they have no idea the only reason any of this exists is because you kept carrying everyone when no one noticed you were collapsing." Walter closed the folder, the papers inside whispering against each other like ghosts. For most of his life, he'd believed that loving people meant keeping his pain out of sight, swallowing it before it made anyone uncomfortable. Now he could see what that had really done. It had left doors open for people with fewer scruples and more ambition. "I may be shaking," he said quietly, and I may repeat myself, and I may get lost in my own driveway sometimes. But I am not helpless, and I am not done." He looked at each of them, his granddaughter with tear-stained cheeks, his daughter with shattered certainty, his son with a past written across his face. "I've kept too many secrets," he went on, "some to protect you, some because I was ashamed. But this," he lifted the folder a little, "this ends tonight. Nobody is going to sign my life away without looking me in the eye and hearing what it cost to get here," he said. For the first time that day his voice didn't wobble. Daniel nodded once. "Then we go in there together," he said. "And if they want to talk about what you can't do, we'll remind them of everything you already did." Emma stepped closer and slid her hand into Walter's, gripping hard. Dirt under his nails, polish on hers, 3 generations of hurt and love meeting in that one touch. Melissa watched, tears streaming freely now, the folder's truth having torn through all her excuses. Walter turned toward the house. The porch light cast a soft circle on the steps, the open doorway beyond it glowing like a stage entrance. He took one step, then another, each one heavier and stronger at the same time. If you were in his place, would you stay outside and disappear, or walk straight into the room where they planned your future, without you? He had almost reached the steps when the hum of the evening broke, tires crunching on gravel, headlights sweeping across the front yard in a harsh white arc. A car door slammed, then another. Inside, the party sounds faded as people turned toward the noise. A firm, authoritative knock rattled the front door, sharp enough to cut through every conversation at once. Through the front window, Walter could see 2 figures on the porch, dark coats, serious faces, a leather briefcase, and a clipboard in their hands. Melissa's breath hitched. Daniel's jaw locked. Emma's grip on Walter's fingers tightened until it hurt. And in that suspended moment, Walter understood. This wasn't a casual visit. The people who had just arrived had come to decide, on paper and in front of everyone, whether the man who had built this family was still fit to live the rest of his life on his own terms. The knock at the door carried a kind of finality that made the entire house fall silent. Inside, laughter evaporated. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Emma's engagement party, once glowing with fairy lights and curated perfection, now felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Daniel stepped closer to Walter instinctively, his jaw set in a protective line. Melissa hesitated behind them, fear spilling onto her face, as if she had finally realized the consequences of letting another man steer her father's future. But Walter, he stayed still. For once he didn't feel small. He felt ready. The living room lights illuminated the 2 figures framed in the doorway. One was a middle-aged man with square glasses and a briefcase tucked under his arm. The other, a younger woman with a state badge clipped to her coat, held a thick clipboard pressed against her chest. They didn't look cruel. They didn't look predatory. But they carried the kind of official purpose that told Walter this wasn't a friendly visit. They were here to evaluate him, to measure his life in checkboxes, to decide whether he had a say in his remaining years. Guests shifted uneasily, unsure whether to pretend nothing unusual was happening or quietly watch the storm gather. Tyler's parents exchanged whispers. Emma's friends froze mid-sip. Even the Bluetooth speaker shut off, leaving a cold quiet that pressed against every wall. Melissa approached the door hesitantly and forced a brittle smile. "Can we help you?" she asked, her voice thin. The woman nodded politely and held up her badge. "Ohio Adult Protective Services. We received documentation requesting a competency evaluation for Mr. Walter Hayes." The man with the briefcase added, "We also received concerns about potential financial mismanagement while under cognitive stress." The words stung Walter more than any insult earlier that day. Financial mismanagement. Cognitive stress. They weren't just questioning his strength, they were questioning his mind. "There's been a misunderstanding," Melissa began, flustered. "We weren't supposed to—" But the woman cut in gently. "Mrs. Reed, the paperwork was signed and submitted. We are obligated to proceed unless the primary subject refuses." Every eye in the room turned to Walter. He felt Daniel tense beside him, ready to fight anyone who dared strip his father's dignity away. Emma stepped closer, sliding her fingers into Walter's hand again. "You don't have to do this, Grandpa," she whispered. "Not on a night that was supposed to be about love." Walter looked at her, at the girl who once traced the calluses of his palms like they were stories, and felt a shift inside him. Have you ever felt a moment when fear finally bowed to courage? He drew a deep breath. "I'm not refusing," he said quietly. Gasps echoed around the room. Daniel snapped his head toward him. "Dad, no." Walter held up a hand to steady him. "If people want to question whether I can live my own life, then they can look me in the eyes and hear the truth." His voice wavered, but not from weakness, only from the weight of everything he had carried alone. "I'm done hiding." The APS workers exchanged a glance, surprised by his calm. The woman stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, we can speak somewhere private if you'd prefer." Walter shook his head. "No, we'll do it right here." He looked around the room, taking in all the faces, some judgmental, some ashamed, some simply curious. If this evaluation is happening because of people in this house, then they should hear the answers they claim to be so worried about. It wasn't spite. It was truth reclaiming its place. Daniel nodded slowly, pride flickering in his eyes. The younger evaluator opened her clipboard. "Mr. Hayes, do you know where you are right now?" Walter smiled faintly. "My granddaughter's engagement party. Columbus, Ohio. On East Maple Drive. House needs new gutters on the left side if you're wondering." "Leffers," a few guests chuckled nervously. The evaluator scribbled. "And the date?" "October 14th, Walter replied. "Though I was born in 45, so I've seen enough Octobers to mix a couple up." Another scribble. Another step forward. "Can you tell me who these people are?" she asked, gesturing to the room. Walter pointed without hesitation. "That's my daughter Melissa. The man next to her is my son Daniel. That young woman holding my hand is Emma. And the man standing near the wall pretending he's not terrified is Tyler." Tyler nearly choked on air. The evaluator hid a smile. The older man asked more questions. Simple memory checks, spatial reasoning, basic math. Walter answered them all, steady as a man laying bricks. But then came the harder question. "Mr. Hayes," the evaluator said calmly, "can you describe any recent difficulties with everyday tasks, such as managing your medications, balancing your checkbook, or remembering appointments?" Walter felt Daniel shift uneasily beside him, ready to jump in. But Walter squeezed his son's hand. "I can answer for myself," he murmured. He took a breath. "My hands shake," he admitted. "Sometimes I drop screws or tools. Sometimes I forget where I put my wallet. I have to write things down more than I used to." He paused. "But I have never once lost track of who I am, or the people I love." A quiet strength filled the room, the kind that comes from telling the truth without flinching. "And financially?" the evaluator asked. "Have you struggled to manage your accounts?" Walter shook his head. "No, but someone stole from me." A ripple ran through the room. Guests whispered. Tyler stared at the floor. The APS workers stiffened. The younger evaluator frowned. "Stole from you? Do you know who?" Walter turned slowly toward the people who mattered most. "My son does," he said, "and my daughter's husband does." Melissa closed her eyes, tears falling fast. Daniel stepped forward. "They can check with the clinic," he said. "They'll confirm the $42,000 never arrived. They can check Dad's bank records. They'll show the withdrawal, and they can check Craig's accounts, because that's where the money went." The older evaluator exchanged a tense glance with his partner. Emma spoke next, voice trembling but clear. "And Craig forged signatures," she said. "He filled out documents behind Grandpa's back. He submitted medical forms without consent. He tried to take control of everything." Her voice cracked. "We found the paperwork." Suddenly, what had been a competency evaluation shifted. The APS workers straightened, posture sharpening. "Mr. Hayes," the woman asked gently, "would you like us to file a report for financial exploitation?" Walter hesitated. The room watched him, breathless. This was the moment he could choose anger or mercy. He looked at Melissa, broken, ashamed, but still his daughter. He looked at Emma, shaking, but standing up for him. He looked at Daniel, scarred, but alive. "I don't want revenge," Walter said softly. "I want my family back." His voice trembled. "And I want my life to stay mine." The APS workers nodded. "That is absolutely your right," the man said. For the first time all night, hope glimmered. Melissa stepped forward slowly, voice soft as a cracked whisper. "Dad, I know I messed up. I trusted the wrong person. I didn't ask questions I should have asked. I let fear make decisions for me. But please, let me fix this." Walter studied her, his heart aching with both love and disappointment. "Then start by telling them the truth," he said gently. Melissa nodded and turned to the APS workers. "My father is capable," she said, tears spilling. "He's strong, he's hurting, but he isn't incapable of making his own decisions." Daniel's voice joined hers. "And he's not alone anymore, not after today." The evaluators exchanged another look. "We will not be proceeding with any competency restriction," the older man said. A collective exhale spread through the room. "However," he added, "we will be filing a full report and initiating an investigation into the financial exploitation." A murmur spread among the guests. But Walter felt only relief, not joy, not celebration. Relief, thin, quiet and warm. The APS workers gathered their things and stepped toward the door, but before they left, the woman paused. "Mr. Hayes, if you ever feel unsafe or pressured again, you call us." Walter nodded. "Thank you," he said softly. The door closed behind them. The sound echoed like a reset button being pressed. Emma threw her arms around him, face buried in his chest. "You did it, Grandpa," she whispered. "You showed them." Walter kissed the top of her head. "I just told the truth." Then Daniel hugged him too, fierce and desperate. But as the family drew together, united in relief, a movement in the corner of Walter's eye made his heart stall. Someone at the edge of the room, silent the whole time, was slowly slipping out the back door. Not Craig, not Tyler, someone else, someone who had been watching the entire evaluation with unreadable eyes, someone who knew more than they'd ever admitted. And as the door clicked shut behind them, Walter realized the danger wasn't over, because the person leaving knew the darkest secret of all. The back door closed with such soft finality that most people in the room didn't notice it. But Walter did. He felt the change in the air like an old wound aching before the storm. Whoever slipped outside wasn't fleeing chaos. They were escaping responsibility. Daniel stiffened beside his father, following Walter's gaze toward the shadowed doorway. "Who was that?" he murmured. Walter shook his head slowly. "Someone who knows something," he whispered, his voice tight. "Something they don't want us to hear." Emma wiped her face and looked toward the doorway, her brows knitting in confusion. "It wasn't Craig," she said. "He's still talking to the officers." Melissa looked around, her eyes scanning every corner of the room. "Then who—" she started, but the words died as realization slowly crept in. There had been someone quiet all night, someone who barely spoke, someone who watched everything with an expression that didn't fit in. Tyler. Walter turned sharply toward the young man standing near the fireplace, his posture rigid, phone clenched in his hand. Tyler froze under the sudden attention. His eyes darted to the back door, then back to the family. "What?" he said defensively. "Why are you all looking at me like that?" Daniel stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Because someone just slipped out the back, and you seem awfully nervous right now." Tyler laughed, but it was a brittle sound. "Nervous? Please, this whole thing is insane. I'm not the bad guy here." But Walter felt a cold ripple across his skin. Something in Tyler's tone sounded rehearsed. Emma stepped closer, her expression trembling between confusion and disbelief. "Tyler, did you know about the paperwork?" Tyler scoffed. "No, why would I?" Daniel folded his arms. "Because your father was the one advising Craig," he said. "And if he was involved, you probably knew more than you want to admit." Tyler's eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. Walter felt the shift. "Son," Walter said softly, "if you know something, now's the time to tell the truth. Have you ever watched someone you thought you knew reveal cracks you never expected?" Tyler opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at Emma. Long, heavy, guilty. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said. Emma's stomach dropped. "Find out what?" she demanded. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before forcing the truth out. "My dad told Craig to file the paperwork. He said it was the best way to protect future assets. He said families lose everything when the older generation starts slipping. He said it wasn't personal." Emma's jaw fell open. "You knew? You knew what they were doing to my grandfather?" Tyler's voice wavered. "I didn't think it would go this far. I don't know. I thought Craig would talk to Walter first, or Melissa, or someone. I thought it was just planning." He winced. "I didn't think anyone would actually send the documents." Daniel's hands curled into fists. "You watched all of this happen tonight, and you said nothing." Emma stared at Tyler as if she didn't recognize him. "You let them humiliate him," she whispered. "You let it happen because you didn't want to argue with your dad?" Tyler tried to step toward her, but Emma backed away. Come on," he pleaded. "I didn't want to ruin your party." "You think this is about the party?" she snapped, her voice cracking. "My grandfather nearly got institutionalized because you didn't want to ruin a night with photos and cake?" Walter swallowed hard. "Em," he said gently. "Let him finish." Emma blinked tears away. "Why?" she whispered. "Why does he get to explain when my grandfather didn't get the same courtesy?" Tyler's face flushed with shame. "Your dad and Craig weren't just talking about assisted living," Daniel said coldly. "They were talking about power of attorney, control of the house, control of the bank accounts." Tyler's silence confirmed it. Emma shook her head slowly, betrayal carving deep lines in her expression. "You are going to marry into this family," she said. "Into my family. And you thought it was okay to take from the man who raised us?" Tyler bit his lip. "I didn't take anything." "But you knew," Daniel said. "And that makes you part of it." Tyler swallowed hard. "There's something else," he whispered. "Something I didn't tell anyone." The room shifted again, hearts pounding, breaths held. Walter steadied himself on the edge of a chair. "Say it," he murmured. "All of it." Tyler looked at Emma, at Melissa, then finally at Walter. "I didn't know Craig stole the $42,000, he said quietly. "But I knew he was asking questions about your house, about the deed, about what happens if someone is declared unfit." He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes down. "My dad told him it would be the biggest opportunity he'd ever get." Melissa staggered backward, horrified. "They were trying to steal my father's house?" Tyler nodded miserably. "And they were talking to someone outside the family? Someone feeding them information?" Daniel stepped forward. "Who?" Tyler's voice dropped to a whisper. "Someone who knew about Walter's diagnosis." Melissa's breath stopped. "Who?" "Only the clinic and Dad himself knew." Tyler hesitated. "Not true." "One more person knew." The silence that followed was suffocating. Walter's pulse thudded in his ears. "Who? Tyler?" Tyler's eyes lifted slowly, fear flickering behind them. "Your neighbor," he said. "Mrs. Porter." Emma froze. "Mrs. Porter? The one who lives across the street?" Tyler nodded. "She told Craig's dad everything. She overheard Walter talking on the phone one day outside. She mentioned the tremors, the lab tests. She assumed he was getting worse." Walter closed his eyes, exhaustion washing through him. Mrs. Porter, the woman who brought him tomatoes from her garden every summer, the woman he helped fix a fence post last spring. "She thought she was helping," Tyler insisted weakly. "She thought your family should know." Daniel clenched his fist so tightly his knuckles whitened. "So the entire neighborhood knew before we did," he growled. Walter shook his head, grief pressing heavily on his shoulders. "I never wanted anyone outside this house to know," he whispered. "Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want pity." Melissa stepped forward, tears streaming. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Walter wiped her cheek gently. "This isn't your fault," he murmured. "People hear one tremor and build an entire story around it." But then Tyler spoke again, quietly, reluctantly. "There's more." Emma closed her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Tyler, please don't." But he did. Craig didn't plan this alone, he said. He had help. More help than you think. Daniel stepped closer, his voice a razor. From who? Tyler swallowed. From someone who wanted the money gone. Someone who needed the $42,000 to disappear without anyone asking questions. Walter felt the room tilt. A sick feeling crawled up his spine. Who? He whispered. Tyler hesitated, then forced the name out. Daniel. The room imploded into shocked silence. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Melissa whispered a broken, "No." Daniel froze, absolutely still, eyes widening with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "What?" he breathed. "What did you just say?" Tyler stepped back, palms raised. "I'm not saying he stole it. I'm saying he knew Craig had it." Daniel's face drained of color. "That's a lie." But Tyler pressed on, voice shaking. Craig said Daniel asked him to hold the money. He said Daniel didn't trust himself with large amounts yet. He said Daniel didn't want the clinic to have all of it at once. Emma turned to Daniel slowly, terrified, confused, betrayed. "Uncle," she whispered, "is that true?" Daniel's breath trembled. "I never." But the words didn't come. And in the hallway, a figure appeared, the very person who slipped out minutes earlier, now standing with something in their hand, a recording device, and a look that meant the real truth was still hiding. The figure in the hallway stepped into the light slowly, as if giving everyone time to absorb the weight of their presence. It wasn't Craig, it wasn't Tyler, and it wasn't a neighbor peering in through the door. It was Lily, the quiet 16-year-old who lived next door, the girl who spent most afternoons sitting on her porch doing homework while listening to the world around her. But tonight, she wasn't holding textbooks. She was holding a small black recording device, its red light still blinking. The room stilled as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and faced the family with trembling determination. I didn't mean to record anything at first," she said softly, "but I heard things I thought Mr. Hayes should know." Walter blinked in confusion. "Lily?" he murmured. "Honey, what are you doing here?" She swallowed hard, hands shaking around the recorder. "You've always been kind to me," she whispered. "You fixed my bike chain when Mom couldn't. You helped my little brother catch his rabbit when it got loose. And tonight, I heard people talking about you like you were just a problem." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't stay quiet." Everyone watched as she placed the recorder gently on the coffee table, the blinking light reflecting in a dozen stunned faces. Daniel's expression flickered with hope. Maybe someone had proof that could clear his name, or condemn him. The uncertainty in his eyes was painful to see. Emma's gaze darted between Lily and Daniel, her breath uneven. "What's on it?" she whispered. Lily glanced apologetically at Daniel. "A lot. But you need to hear it." Tyler's face drained of color. "Lily," he warned, "you don't know what you're talking about." But she ignored him, pressing the play button. Crackling static filled the room before giving way to voices, conversations that had happened earlier in the evening. Conversations no one knew were being captured. First came Craig's voice, sharp and frustrated. "He's working himself into the ground. We need to get this done before he ends up hurting himself on the job." Then Tyler's father answered, "Don't worry. Once the competency paper goes through, the bank will have to reroute control. It's clean." Emma stiffened. "I knew it," she whispered. Melissa covered her mouth with shaking fingers, but the recording wasn't finished. A second clip began. This time, Craig sounded uneasy. "I don't know about this money thing. Daniel asked me to keep it quiet until he figured stuff out. But what if Walter asks questions?" Tyler's father replied, "Then distract him. Say it's for medical bills. No one questions a sick old man." The room fell utterly silent. Walter felt something inside him crack. The kind of break that isn't loud, but irreversible. Daniel's face flooded with devastation. "That's not what happened," he said, voice trembling. "I never told him to keep anything. I told him I needed time to figure out how to face Dad. I didn't ask him to hide the money. I didn't ask him to steal it." Lily stepped closer, eyes kind but firm. "There's more," she said. She pressed play again. Another clip began. one that changed everything. It was Daniel's voice, tense but clear. "Craig, I can't take Dad's money. You need to give it back. I'll figure out a way to pay the clinic myself." Everyone froze. Then Craig's voice answered, irritated. "Relax. Your dad won't miss it. He's practically falling apart already. Just let me handle things." And just like that, the lie shattered. The accusation against Daniel dissolved, and the truth, undeniable, recorded, preserved, rose to the surface. Emma's breath hitched. "You tried to give it back," she whispered. Daniel closed his eyes, relief and pain washing over him like a wave. "I tried," he said. "I didn't want Dad carrying my mistakes." Walter stepped forward, putting a hand on his son's shoulder. "I never believed you took it," he murmured. Daniel's voice broke. "I thought you might," he whispered, ashamed. Walter squeezed his shoulder. "You're my boy. You were lost, but you were never gone." Lily looked up at them, tears forming. "There's still one last recording," she said. "I didn't understand it, but I think you will." She pressed play for the final time. A faint sound filled the room, wind from a cracked car window. Then the low voices of Tyler's father and Craig. "We move on the house next," Tyler's father whispered. "Once the competency hearing goes through, the deed transfers under family review. You take control, you get power of attorney, and the assets can be leveraged," Craig murmured. "And the money?" "Gone," Tyler's father said. "We can say Walter misplaced it." "Easy enough." There was a pause. "What about Daniel?" Craig sighed. "He's the perfect scapegoat." Emma's face crumpled. "Oh, God," she whispered. Melissa staggered back against the kitchen counter, gripping the edge as though the room were spinning. Walter stared at the black little device, his heart pounding slow and heavy. He thought betrayal came in one shape. He thought humiliation came from dirt on his clothes and whispers at a party. He had no idea the real wound was deeper, colder, calculated. Daniel turned to Lily, voice soft. "You didn't have to get involved," he said. She shook her head. "Someone had to." Walter stepped toward her, eyes full of gratitude. "You brought the truth into this room," he said. "That makes you braver than any adult here tonight." Lily flushed, wiping her eyes. "I just didn't want you to lose everything." Walter reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "Thanks to you. I won't." But Tyler wasn't done. His panic erupted in a burst of anger. "You don't even know the whole story?" he shouted. "You think this fixes everything?" Emma stared at him through tears. "Doesn't it?" Tyler shook his head, voice cracking. "My dad, he didn't want the house just for money. He was trying to settle another debt, something dangerous." Melissa frowned. "What debt?" Tyler looked at Walter. "The debt he owed to someone connected to your job, someone who knew you still worked construction, someone who started asking why an old man like you was still pouring concrete." Daniel stepped forward. "Who?" Tyler swallowed. "A man named Rourke." Daniel's face went pale instantly. Walter felt a cold shock travel down his spine. He hadn't heard that name in years. Not since Margaret's final hospital bill. Not since he'd borrowed money he never told a soul about. "No," Walter whispered. Daniel turned to him sharply. "Dad, why do you know that name?" Emma covered her mouth as new fear rippled through the room. Because Rourke wasn't just a name. It was a threat, a shadow from Walter's past. And Tyler's father had just dragged that shadow straight into their lives. The name Rourke hit the room like a dropped match in a dry forest. Small, almost harmless at first, then suddenly capable of tearing everything apart. Walter's breath caught so sharply that even Emma heard it. Daniel stepped closer, placing a steadying hand on his father's back. "Dad," he whispered urgently, "why do you know that name?" Walter didn't answer at first. He looked down at his aging hands, the same hands that poured concrete, lifted beams, held his wife as she died, and built a life out of sacrifice. Hands that carried secrets, hands that paid debts no one knew existed. Melissa wiped her face, confusion turning her voice sharp. "Dad, who is this man? What does he have to do with Tyler's father? What debt?" Walter exhaled slowly, each word scraping its way out. Rourke helped me after your mother died. I borrowed money. Money I shouldn't have touched." Silence slammed into the room. "Dad?" Daniel pressed. "How much?" Walter shook his head. "Enough to cover the last hospital bill. Enough to make sure your mother had the care she needed. Enough to bury her without leaving all of you drowning." Emma's breath hitched. "Grandpa, why didn't you tell us?" Walter's eyes softened painfully. "Because your mom was already breaking. You were a child." Daniel was spiraling. "I couldn't add financial ruin to that grief." Daniel stepped back, guilt crossing his face like a shadow. "Dad, I had no idea you were carrying all of that alone." Walter squeezed his shoulder. "You weren't in a place to help. I didn't blame you then, and I don't blame you now." But Daniel's eyes remained clouded. Regret has a way of echoing louder than forgiveness. Tyler, still pale, swallowed hard. "My dad owed Rourke, too. And when he couldn't pay, he started looking for leverage. Something big, something he could take or transfer. Something like your house." Melissa stared at him, horrified. "You're telling me your father wanted to use my father's home to settle a debt with some dangerous loan shark?" Tyler nodded miserably. "He said it was just business, that older people didn't need big houses anyway, that he'd make sure Walter landed somewhere safe. He talked about it like he was being generous." Daniel clenched his jaws. "That's not generosity, that's predatory." Walter took a shaky breath. "I tried to pay Rourke back years ago, but my overtime wasn't enough. Every time I got close, new interest had shown up. I thought he forgot about an old debt from an old man." Tyler shook his head. "He didn't forget. He passed it to my father." Melissa stepped between Walter and Tyler, her voice trembling with fury. "And you knew? You knew this entire time, and still stood here pretending nothing was wrong?" Tyler looked pleadingly at Emma. "I wanted to tell you, but I was scared." Emma's eyes filled with tears, not soft ones, not delicate ones, but the kind that come from watching trust rot. "Scared of what?" she asked. "Losing me? Losing my family? Or scared of getting caught?" Tyler flinched. "All of it." Emma shook her head. "Love isn't fear, Tyler. It's honesty. It's protection. It's showing up, even when it's messy." She took a shaky breath. "You didn't show up." Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Walter, the old instinct to protect his father rising like muscle memory. "Let me be clear," he said to Tyler. "Your father didn't stumble into this. He strategized it. He saw a family grieving and broke and used it as an opportunity." Tyler's voice cracked. I know, and I'm sorry." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Sorry doesn't undo what he planned. It doesn't make your father's debt our responsibility." Emma hugged herself, trembling. "Tyler, tell us everything. Now." Tyler swallowed, nodding slowly. "My dad's been in debt for years. Gambling first, then loans. He used the business as collateral, but when it started failing, he panicked. He said Rourke would collect in other ways. Then he saw your grandfather still working, still earning, still with an almost paid house. He called it untapped opportunity." Emma's face twisted. "He talked about my grandfather like a business strategy?" Tyler nodded. "Yes, and worse. He said once competency papers were filed, he could step in to help Craig manage things." Melissa's voice was a whisper. "Meaning, he'd take control of the house?" Tyler nodded. "And the money, and anything else legally accessible." Walter closed his eyes. "So everything I worked for, everything your mother and I built, was about to be stolen to pay another man's debt." Emma grabbed Walter's hand. "Not anymore. Not now that we know." Daniel stepped closer. "Dad, you're not losing anything. Not your house. Not your freedom. Not your life." Walter looked at his children, the ones he protected, the ones he hurt by protecting them. "If you were in my place," he whispered, "would you forgive any of this?" A heavy silence fell, not because the answer was unclear, but because forgiveness is always heavier than blame. Melissa stepped to Walter, tears streaking her face. "Dad, I judged you without asking anything. I believed lies because they were easier than the truth. I let fear guide me, but I'm done letting fear run this family." She took his hand. "I'm not losing you, not because of a debt you carried alone, not because of a man who saw you as an opportunity instead of a father. Daniel nodded firmly. I'll talk to the police. I'll show them Lily's recordings. I'll take responsibility for my part in letting Craig manipulate me. I'll testify against him. All of it. Walter's voice cracked. Son, you don't need to carry that. Daniel shook his head. You carried everything. Too much. This is mine to carry now. For once, Walter let his son take that weight without trying to pull it back. Tyler watched helplessly as the family drew tighter around Walter, a circle he'd managed to stand inside for years without earning it. Emma finally turned to him fully. You should leave, she said softly. Tyler flinched. Please don't do this. I love you. Emma's voice wavered but didn't break. Love that's afraid of truth isn't love, and love that stays silent while someone tries to destroy my grandfather's life isn't love either. Tyler's throat bobbed. So that's it? Emma's eyes glistened. You made your choice before I ever made mine. Tyler took a shaky step back toward the door. I never meant for any of this to happen, Emma whispered, but you watched it happen. Melissa turned her face away. Daniel stared him down. Walter simply looked tired, very tired. Tyler lingered a final second, hoping for someone to pull him back, to give him a last lifeline. No one did. He walked out the door slowly, closing it behind him with a soft and final click. The house settled into a stillness that felt like the exhale after a storm. Deep, fragile, necessary. Walter looked around at the remnants of the party. Untouched cupcakes, toppled mason jars, confetti that now looked more like debris. The celebration had turned into a reckoning, but somewhere inside that mess, a seed of healing had taken root. Emma squeezed his hand. Grandpa, she whispered, you're not going anywhere. You're staying with us, with me, with your family. Melissa nodded. We'll help you. We'll go to your appointments. We'll fight for you. We'll protect what's yours. Walter blinked, overwhelmed. All I ever wanted was to not be a burden. Daniel's voice softened. Dad, you were never the burden. Our silence was. Walter swallowed, feeling something warm spread through his chest. Pain mixed with gratitude. The start of reconciliation. The start of truth finally being shared. Thank you, he whispered, for choosing me. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. We should have chosen you sooner. But just as the family began to breathe again, just as hope finally warmed the cracks in their chest, the front door burst open with a violent bang. 2 officers rushed inside, frantic. The older one shouted, Everyone stay where you are! And behind them, dragged in cuffs, bloody, bruised, wide-eyed, was Tyler. His voice shook as he stared at Walter. They're coming for you, he gasped. Rourke knows everything. The officers guided Tyler into the living room, his wrists cuffed and his face streaked with fear, dried blood along his cheek where he'd clearly fallen or been struck. But something in his eyes had changed. The arrogance, the excuses, the polished calm were all gone. He looked at Walter as if looking at the only person who could understand him. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice trembling with sincerity that sounded painfully real. Walter didn't answer right away. He simply let the words exist, heavy and raw, until the room felt safe enough to breathe again. The officers stepped forward, explaining quickly that Tyler had tried to warn them about a man approaching the neighborhood, a man with a record of violent intimidation, someone whose description matched Rourke, but the man was nowhere to be found when they arrived. It was enough to freeze the house in collective terror, but also enough to make everyone realize the truth. Tyler hadn't run to save himself. He'd run to save Walter. Emma's expression softened just barely as she stepped toward him. Why did you come back? She asked quietly. Tyler swallowed. Because he doesn't deserve this. None of you do. And I couldn't let something happen without trying to fix what I broke. Walter stepped closer, exhaustion and wisdom meeting in his eyes. Trying matters, he said gently, even when it's late. Tyler's shoulders shook as he nodded. Emma reached out, not to hold him, but to steady herself, caught between grief and the faintest hint of forgiveness. There was no dramatic kiss, no reunion, no instant healing, only the complicated truth that people are more than their worst moments, and sometimes trying, even imperfectly, is the first step to redemption. It didn't erase the damage, but it mattered. The officers spoke with the family, explaining that they would stay in the neighborhood until they had confirmation that Rourke was no longer a threat. The news brought relief, but also the quiet reckoning of what it meant to live under the shadow of someone else's past. Walter felt the weight of that shadow press against him, but he didn't let it bury him. Not anymore. "I've been running from ghosts for a long time," he said to Daniel, Melissa, and Emma. "But maybe it's time I stop hiding and let people help me carry them." Daniel placed a hand on his father's shoulder, grounding him. "You're not facing anything alone again," he said softly. "Rourke, the bills, the past, the diagnosis, none of it. Not anymore." Melissa nodded, her voice fragile but determined. "We'll fix what can be fixed. We'll repair what can be repaired. And what can't, we'll carry together." Walter felt something inside him loosen, a knot tied years ago in silence and fear. "Thank you," he whispered, "for choosing me now, for seeing me now." Emma slipped her arm through his. "You're our heart," she said. "Always were." And for the first time that night Walter believed it, not as a compliment, not as pity, but as truth, not because he needed them, but because they needed him too. He had spent a lifetime holding the family together. Now it was their turn to hold him. Outside, the officers patrolled the street, their radios crackling softly in the distance. But inside, the house began to feel less like a battleground and more like a place where healing could finally begin. The engagement party, though ruined beyond salvaging, slowly transformed into something entirely different. Guests whispered apologies. Neighbors left quietly, embarrassed to have witnessed so much pain exposed without consent. But some stayed, offering warm embraces, casseroles, awkward but sincere words of support. One even said, "You raised strong kids, Walt." And for the first time, Walter didn't shrink from praise. He accepted it with a quiet nod. "They learned from their mother," he said, "and from mistakes we all made." Melissa gathered the crumpled decorations, wiping her eyes as she cleared away the pieces of a celebration that had become a reckoning. She looked at Walter with a fragile smile. "Dad, do you think Mom would have been proud of us tonight?" Walter paused, the grief still tender, even after all these years. "I think she would have wanted the truth," he said, "even when it hurt, especially when it hurt." Melissa nodded, and together they hung the last strand of lights, not to celebrate, but to honor the woman who taught them that family wasn't perfection. It was presence. Daniel stayed close, as if afraid his father might vanish if he blinked too long. "Dad," he said softly, "I know I can't undo the past, but I promise I'm going to spend the rest of my life being the son you deserved from the start." Walter cupped his son's face gently. "You don't owe me perfection," he murmured. "You owe yourself forgiveness." Daniel's breath trembled, and for the first time in years, Walter saw the boy he once held after nightmares, the boy who needed someone to say he was enough. "I love you," Daniel whispered. Walter nodded, eyes shining. "I always did." Later that night, when most guests had gone, and silence settled over the house, Walter stepped onto the porch alone. The air was cool, the sky dark but clear, the world blessedly still. He ran his thumb over the porch railing, a railing he'd helped install 10 years ago. This house wasn't just wood and paint. It was memories, sacrifices, and the echoes of love he had never expected to feel again. Emma joined him quietly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked. Walter inhaled deeply. "For the first time in a long time, I think I might be." Emma looked up at him, the porch light casting a soft glow on her face. "You know," she said, "I used to think your hands were magic." Walter chuckled gently. "Magic? Yeah," she said, "because they fixed everything." Walter lifted his hands, scarred, calloused, trembling slightly. "They can't fix everything anymore," he said. Emma took one of them and held it tight. "They don't have to. We're here now." Walter's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you, sweetheart," he whispered, "for reminding me that being cared for isn't the same as being a burden." Inside, Melissa brewed tea while Daniel helped clean dishes. simple tasks that wouldn't erase the damage but made the night feel less sharp. When Walter stepped inside, they all looked up with the same expression, worry mixed with love. Emma spoke first. "So, what now?" she asked. Walter gave a tired, soft smile. "Now?" He sank into the chair they offered him. "Now we live, we talk, we tell the truth, we fight when we need to, we forgive when we can, and we keep choosing each other." Melissa nodded. "And we make sure no one ever tries to take advantage of you again," Daniel added. "And we keep Rourke far away from this family." Walter lifted a hand gently. "He won't get near me, not with all of you standing beside me." And for once the room didn't hold fear. It held unity, a promise silently made and quietly kept. The kind of promise families rebuild themselves on. They sat together for a long time after that. No shouting, no secrets, no shadows. Just a family rediscovering the shape of itself. Just a grandfather finally receiving what he'd given for decades. Presence, protection, and unconditional love. And in the soft quiet of that living room, surrounded by the people he fought hardest to shield, Walter felt something settle inside him. Not peace, not entirely, but the beginning of it. When the night finally ended and Emma's head rested on his shoulder as she drifted to sleep on the couch, Walter allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply, to feel the truth of the day, to understand what had nearly been lost and what had been saved. He looked at Daniel and Melissa, and they looked back with gratitude that didn't need words. And in that quiet moment, Walter Hayes, humiliated, underestimated, nearly stripped of everything, finally understood that dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something they can never take away once you reclaim it yourself.